This is a brief introduction to the history of psychology. Now, psychology is a relatively new discipline that has its roots in philosophy and biology. It started in the 1600s with French philosopher René Descartes, who suggested that the mind and the body are separate from each other and famously said, "I think, therefore I am." It became known as dualism. And although this view has been challenged, it influenced psychology because it suggested that the mind can be an object of study in its own right. Next up, we have John Locke, who proposed empiricism. This is the belief that all experience is obtained through our senses, and that no man's knowledge can go beyond his experience. Now, he argued that humans are born as blank slates, that human behaviour can only be fully understood by investigating external events that are observable and measurable. Now, 1879 brought Willhelm Wundt, really the true father of psychology. And we say that because he was the one who campaigned to make psychology an independent discipline. He was the one who opened the first experimental laboratory in Germany, and he was the first one to use the scientific method to observe, to analyse, and to describe. Now, he studied the structure of the mind using what we call introspection. Now, he and his co-workers recorded their unconscious thoughts, broken down into their constituent parts. And they then went off and set up new laboratories across Europe and North America. Now, most famously, we come on to Freud, who established the psychodynamic approach. Now, he emphasised the influence of the unconscious mind on behaviour, arguing that physical and psychological problems could be explained in terms of conflict within the mind. Now, Freud was the first to argue that psychological illness has a psychological cause, and therefore it should be treated psychologically. Yet his views are incredibly controversial and have caused great debate, and obviously come against some resistance. Moving forward to 1913, saw the establishment of the behavioural approach, and Skinner believed that psychology should use a scientific method to understand behaviour. Only studying observable and measurable behaviours. Skinner believed that the mind should not be studied as it cannot be objectively measured. He famously said, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well formed, with my own special world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take any one of them to train them to become the type of specialist I might select, be that doctor, lawyer, or artist, and yes, even beggarman and thief." And so behaviouralism dominated psychology for the next 50 years. Until 1950, when Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow developed the humanistic approach. Now, this approach rejected the psychodynamic approach and its pessimistic view on humans. It disagreed with the behaviourist view that all behaviour is nurture and not nature, and obviously beyond the control of the individual. Instead, Rogers and Maslow believed that all humans are essentially good, with the freedom to choose one's own behaviour, and disagreed with the scientific method for studying humans. The humanistic approach believes that humans have unique qualities of freedom and personal growth, and this approach looked at self-actualization within the hierarchy of needs. The 1960s brought with it a cognitive revolution because of the introduction of the computer. It gave psychologists a metaphor for how the human mind processes information. The cognitive revolution reintroduced the study of mental processes to psychology in a much more scientific way than Willhelm Wundt's earlier investigations into introspection. Famous cognitive psychologists include Piaget, Chomsky and Simon. The cognitive approach took over from the behaviourist approach and continues to be a dominant approach today. It looks at the systematic understanding of mental processes involved in acquiring knowledge. So into the modern day. The 1970s saw the development of social psychology, which studied how people behave in groups. Now, many experiments were carried out during this time that would not actually be allowed today due to the highly unethical nature of their research. Yet this research contributed enormously to the understanding of behaviours such as obedience, conformity, prejudice, and discrimination. The 80s and 90s saw the biological approach begin to establish itself as a dominant scientific perspective within psychology. Again, this is due to the advances in technology that have led to an increased understanding of the brain and the biological processes. And so to today, the beginning of the 21st century, neuroscience emerges as its own discipline, bringing together both cognitive and biological approaches. It's influenced by earlier computer models, and it investigates how biological structures influence mental states, and it is set to become a dominant area within psychology.